The pen hovered over the crisp, legal parchment of the divorce settlement. Across the mahogany table, her husband's mother wore a smile so sharp it could cut glass, whispering to her son that they were finally taking out the trash. They offered her $50,000, a pitiful severance package, for 3 years of marriage, assuming she would desperately claw at it to survive. They mocked her cheap clothes, her quiet demeanor, and her supposed lack of ambition. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. Audrey simply signed her name, walked out of the high-rise law firm, and stepped into the back of a waiting armored Maybach. They had no idea they had just divorced the silent majority shareholder of the very private equity firm that held all their company's debt. The dining room at the Chicago Cut Steakhouse, overlooking the Chicago River, was loud, but the silence at the Gallagher family table was deafening. Audrey sat at the far end, her hands resting quietly in her lap, wearing a simple navy cashmere sweater that her mother-in-law, Brianna, had just loudly compared to a clearance item from a Midwestern department store. It was, in fact, a custom-spun Loro Piana piece that cost more than Brianna's entire outfit, but Audrey had never been one to flaunt labels. She didn't need to. "Nathan, darling," Brianna said, deliberately turning her back slightly toward Audrey. "I was speaking with Richard Wentworth at the country club yesterday. He was telling me about the new expansion of their supply chain network. It's a $50 million venture. Victoria is heading the regional division. Have you seen Victoria lately? She's doing spectacularly." Nathan shifted uncomfortably, swirling his Cabernet. He was a handsome man, sharp-featured and driven, but easily swayed by the gravitational pull of his family's expectations. He was the vice president of Gallagher Freight and Logistics, a mid-sized company founded by his grandfather that had recently hit a slump. "I ran into her last week at the Chamber of Commerce mixer." "Mom," Nathan mumbled, avoiding Audrey's gaze. "She's doing well." "She's a powerhouse, Violet," Nathan's younger sister chimed in. She looked pointedly at Audrey. "It's so important for a man in Nathan's position to have a partner who understands the corporate landscape, someone who can host galas, network with the C-suite at JP Morgan Chase or BlackRock, and bring actual value to the table. Not someone who just stays home and works on her little laptop." Audrey took a slow sip of her sparkling water. "I do more than work on a laptop, Violet," she said, her voice even, betraying none of the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. "Oh, right. You're freelance consulting?" Brianna laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Audrey, sweetheart, we appreciate that you try to contribute to the household, but let's be realistic. Nathan is carrying the weight of a legacy. He's dealing with regional distributors, union negotiations, and supply chain logistics. He needs a wife who is an asset, a wife who doesn't look like she just finished a shift at a local bakery when we have important clients over." For 3 years, this had been the dynamic. When Nathan first met Audrey in a quiet coffee shop in Wicker Park, he was charmed by her serenity and grounded nature. He thought she was a struggling, independent analyst. She let him believe it. Audrey had learned long ago that men like Nathan, ambitious, deeply insecure men, needed to feel like the provider. What Nathan didn't know was that Audrey Miller was the sole founder and CEO of Aegis Global Holdings. While Nathan stressed over a $2 million deficit in his family's trucking routes, Audrey was routinely on private, encrypted calls with wealth managers at Goldman Sachs, orchestrating acquisitions of tech startups and commercial real estate portfolios across North America. Her net worth hovered quietly around the $3.2 billion mark. She had chosen a life of stealth wealth, traumatized by the fake friends and parasitic opportunists that had surrounded her during her early 20s, when she first made her fortune in early cloud computing infrastructure. She had wanted someone to love her, not for her portfolio. For a time, Nathan did, but as the Gallagher family business began to face fierce competition from modernized, tech-driven logistics giants, the pressure mounted. The family began looking for a scapegoat for Nathan's stagnation, and they found it in his underachieving wife. "Leave it alone, Mom," Nathan said, though his defense was weak, lacking any real conviction. He didn't reach for Audrey's hand. He didn't defend her honor, he just stared at his steak. Audrey watched him, a quiet grief settling in her chest. The man she had loved, the man who used to bring her wildflowers and sit with her on the fire escape, talking about the future, was gone. He had been swallowed whole by his mother's toxic ambition and his own bruised ego. "I'm just being pragmatic," Brianna sniffed, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. "The Wentworths are practically Chicago royalty. Victoria has always had a soft spot for Nathan. It's a tragedy, really, how things turn out. Some people build empires, and some people just take up space." Audrey placed her napkin on the table. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her tone perfectly polite. "I need to use the restroom." As she walked away, she heard Violet's muffled voice. "God, she is so embarrassing, Nathan. You're dragging dead weight." In the marbled restroom, Audrey leaned against the sink, looking at her reflection. She looked tired, not from her actual work, which invigorated her, but from the emotional labor of shrinking herself to fit into Nathan's fragile world. She pulled out her phone and dialed a private number. Pendleton, a crisp, British-accented voice, answered on the second ring. It was Andrew Pendleton, her chief legal counsel and right-hand man. "Andrew," Audrey said softly, "the Gallagher Freed account, the one managed by our subsidiary, Vanguard Credit." "Yes, Miss Miller. We hold approximately $42 million in their restructured corporate debt. They are barely making the interest payments. We've been giving them leniency per your direct, though highly unusual, standing order." "Remove the leniency," Audrey said, staring into her own eyes in the mirror. "Enforce the standard covenants. If they miss the next quarter's margin by a single cent, I want the default clauses triggered." "Understood," Andrew replied, asking no questions. "Shall I prepare the restructuring teams?" "Not yet," Audrey said. "Let's see how they handle the pressure first." The tension in the Lincoln Park penthouse was thick enough to choke on. It was a Tuesday evening, a month after the disastrous dinner at the steakhouse. Audrey was sitting at the kitchen island, quietly reviewing a highly confidential merger document on her tablet when the front door unlocked. Nathan walked in. He didn't take off his coat. He didn't greet her. He just stood in the foyer, running a hand through his hair, looking like a man who had just rehearsed a speech 100 times in his car. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight. Audrey locked her tablet and set it face down. "All right, I'm listening." Nathan paced into the living room, refusing to make eye contact. "The business it's struggling, Audrey. The logistics market is getting eaten alive by automated tech firms. My father's legacy is slipping through my fingers, and the board is breathing down my neck. We have a massive debt balloon payment coming up with Vanguard Credit, and they just revoked our leniency grace period without warning." Audrey kept her face entirely impassive. "I'm sorry to hear that, Nathan. Is there anything I can do?" Nathan stopped pacing and finally looked at her. His eyes were cold, stripped of whatever affection used to reside there. "That's exactly the problem, Audrey. No, there is absolutely nothing you can do. And that's what I realized today." He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and dropped it onto the marble kitchen island. It landed with a heavy, final thud. Audrey looked at the envelope, then back up at him. She knew exactly what it was. "I've filed for divorce," Nathan said, his voice wavering for a fraction of a second before hardening. "My mother and Violet were right. I've been blinding myself to the reality of our situation. I need a partner who can stand shoulder to shoulder with me in the trenches of the corporate world. I need someone with connections, with capital, with leverage. You're a good person, Audrey, but you're small time. You don't understand how the real world works. You don't understand what it takes to survive at this level." Audrey felt a strange sensation wash over her. It wasn't heartbreak, though that had already happened slowly over the past year. It was a profound, chilling clarity. "You're leaving me because I'm not rich enough?" Audrey asked, her voice dangerously calm. "Because I don't have a recognizable last name?" "Don't put it like that," Nathan snapped, defensive. "It's about synergy. It's about alignment of goals. Victoria Wentworth understands." "Ah," Audrey interrupted softly. "Victoria, I see. Has she already agreed to merge the Wentworth supply lines with Gallagher Freight? Or is that contingent on the ink drying on these papers? Nathan flushed red. That is none of your business. Victoria is an old friend who sees my potential. She's willing to have her family's firm inject emergency capital into my company. But her father made it clear he only invests in family. Real family. So you're marrying her for a bailout, Audrey stated simply. I am securing my family's future, Nathan shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. Something you know nothing about. You sit here in the apartment I pay for, doing your little freelance gigs, contributing a few $1,000s a month, while I am out there fighting off corporate wolves. You have no idea what it's like to have millions of dollars on the line. You have no idea what true pressure is. Audrey looked at the man she had sworn to love, in sickness and in health. She thought about the $1.5 billion acquisition deal she had greenlit just that morning before he even woke up. She thought about the literal corporate wolves, billionaire hedge fund managers, and ruthless private equity barons who sought her counsel and feared her wrath. She looked at Nathan, and for the first time, she saw exactly how incredibly small he was. You're right, Nathan, Audrey said, reaching for the manila envelope. She pulled out the documents. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I suppose I don't understand your kind of pressure. My lawyer has drawn up a fair settlement, Nathan said, his tone shifting to a patronizing calm, relieved she wasn't crying or screaming. We haven't been married long enough for you to claim half of my assets, especially since the business is a premarital family trust. But I'm not a monster. There's a clause in there for a $50,000 payout. It should be enough to get you a nice apartment in the suburbs and keep you on your feet while you look for a full-time job. $50,000. To Audrey, it was a rounding error. It was the cost of a weekend trip to her private estate in Monaco. How generous, she murmured. We need to finalize this quickly, Nathan added, checking his luxury watch, a gift Audrey had secretly pulled strings to get him off a 5-year waiting list, though he believed it was his own charm that secured it. We have a meeting at my lawyer's office tomorrow at noon. My mother will be there to represent the family trust's interests. Brianna is coming to our divorce signing? Audrey asked, an eyebrow raised. She's a stakeholder in the company, Nathan said stiffly. It's standard procedure to ensure the business assets are protected from spousal litigation. Audrey flipped to the back page of the document. She didn't need to read the clauses. She didn't care about his failing logistics company or his miserable penthouse. She just wanted out. Tomorrow at noon, Audrey agreed. I'll be there. As Nathan packed his overnight bag to go stay at a hotel, or more likely, at Victoria Wentworth's estate, Audrey walked into her home office. She closed the door, engaged the electronic privacy locks she had installed, and opened her secure terminal. She drafted a single, encrypted email to Andrew Pendleton. Andrew, the divorce is moving forward. Do not contest it. Do not ask for a single penny of Gallagher assets. Let them think they've won. However, I want a full, microscopic audit of Gallagher Freight and logistics by morning. Find every vulnerability, find every weak supply line, every unpaid vendor, every over-leveraged truck in their fleet. When I am no longer legally tied to Nathan Gallagher, Vanguard Credit will initiate a hostile takeover. Let the wolves out. The law offices of Sterling, Vance, and Caldwell wait. She couldn't use those names. The law offices of Montgomery and Pierce occupied the 45th floor of a sleek glass tower in downtown Chicago. The conference room smelled of lemon polish, expensive cologne, and arrogance. Audrey arrived exactly at noon. She was dressed simply, as always, a beige trench coat over a white silk blouse and tailored black trousers. She carried no designer handbag, just a simple leather portfolio. Sitting across the sprawling oak table was Nathan, looking pale but resolute. Next to him was Brianna, dripping in diamonds and a smug sense of victory, and Violet, who was busy texting on her phone, clearly bored by the proceedings. Their high-powered attorney, an older man named Robert Pierce, sat at the head of the table. Ah, Mrs. Gallagher, or soon-to-be Miss Miller, I presume, Robert Pierce said smoothly. motioning to the empty chair across from them. Please, have a seat. Do you have legal counsel present? I don't need counsel for this, Audrey said, taking her seat. She placed her portfolio on the table. Brianna let out a soft, mocking laugh. Of course she doesn't. What's there to negotiate? The clothes in her closet? Mother, please, Nathan muttered, though he didn't look at Audrey. Pierce steepled his fingers. Miss Miller, it is highly unadvisable to sign legal documents without an attorney. However, if you insist, we can proceed. The terms are straightforward. Mr. Gallagher retains all shares in Gallagher Freight and Logistics, the primary residence in Lincoln Park, and his investment portfolios, in exchange for your waiver of alimony and any future claims against the Gallagher estate. He is offering a one-time lump sum of $50,000. It's more than fair, Violet spoke up, not looking up from her phone. Honestly, you're lucky to get that. Most guys would make you leave with nothing but the suitcase you brought. Audrey ignored the younger woman. She looked directly at Nathan. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want, Nathan? Once I sign these papers, there is no going back. Our ties are severed, completely. Nathan met her gaze, his jaw tightening. For a fleeting second, Audrey saw a flash of doubt, a memory of the girl who used to make him laugh in the rain, the girl who rubbed his shoulders when he came home stressed. But then Brianna placed a manicured hand on his arm, and the doubt vanished, replaced by cold ambition. It's what has to be done, Audrey, Nathan said coldly. We're in different leagues. You need to accept that. I accept it, Audrey said softly. She picked up the solid gold pen. Pierce slid across the table. She didn't read the pages. She didn't argue about the penthouse or the assets. With swift, precise strokes, she signed her name on every dotted line. Audrey Miller. When she handed the documents back, Brianna let out a loud sigh of relief, clapping her hands together softly. Well, that was painless. I told you, Nathan, she wouldn't put up a fight. She doesn't have the spine for it. You can expect the $50,000 to be wired to your account by the end of the business day, Miss Miller, Pierce said, looking at her with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. We wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors. Audrey stood up. She buttoned her trench coat. She looked at the three Gallaghers sitting across from her. They looked so incredibly smug, so triumphant in their petty little victory over a woman they believed was beneath them. Keep the $50,000, Nathan, Audrey said, her voice echoing slightly in the large, quiet room. Nathan frowned. What? Don't be ridiculous, Audrey. You need that money. How are you going to afford rent? I said, keep it, Audrey repeated, a small, terrifyingly serene smile playing on her lips. Put it toward your debt with Vanguard Credit. I hear they are becoming quite aggressive with their collections. The blood drained from Nathan's face. The mention of Vanguard Credit in this room was like setting off a grenade. It was a closely guarded corporate secret that they were drowning in debt to that specific firm. How do you know about Vanguard? Nathan stammered, his eyes wide. Who cares how she knows? Brianna snapped, though she looked momentarily unsettled. She probably snooped through your briefcase. Typical. Audrey didn't reply. She simply turned on her heel and walked toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room. Goodbye, Nathan, she said without looking back. She stepped out into the hallway and pressed the button for the elevator. As the stainless steel doors opened, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Andrew Pendleton. The ink is dry. The hostile takeover protocols are armed. Audrey stepped into the elevator. Execute, she typed back, and hit send, just as the doors slid shut. When she exited the lobby of the building, the crisp Chicago wind whipped her hair. A sleek, midnight black armored Maybach pulled up to the curb. The chauffeur, a towering man in a dark suit, immediately stepped out and opened the rear door for her. Good afternoon, Miss Miller, he said, respectfully. Good afternoon, Thomas, Audrey replied, stepping into the luxurious, soundproof interior of the vehicle. Sitting in the opposite seat, holding an iPad displaying plummeting stock graphs, was Andrew Pendleton. The older lawyer looked up, his eyes gleaming with professional ruthlessness. Welcome back, boss, Andrew said. How was the divorce? Liberating, Audrey said, pouring herself a glass of Macallan 25 from the car's built-in decanter. What's the status of Gallagher Freight? Vanguard Credit has officially issued a notice of default on their $42 million debt, Andrew reported, tapping the screen. Furthermore, our real estate division has just purchased the lease on their primary shipping warehouses in Detroit and Indianapolis. We are tripling their rent, effective 30 days from now. And the Wentworths? Audrey asked, taking a slow sip of the scotch. Ah, the Wentworths, Andrew smirked. I reached out to Richard Wentworth's primary investors. When they learned that Vanguard Capital, your capital, would pull our global backing from their firm if they injected money into a sinking ship like Gallagher Freight, Richard Wentworth pulled out of the deal entirely. As of 10 minutes ago, the Wentworth-Gallagher merger is dead in the water. Audrey looked out the tinted window as the Maybach glided smoothly into the Chicago traffic, leaving the law firm and her old life far behind. Nathan had wanted a woman in his league. He was about to find out that she didn't just play in the major leagues. She owned the stadium. Take me to the office, Andrew, Audrey said, her eyes cold and bright. It's time to go to work. The mahogany-paneled walls of Gallagher Freight and Logistics used to make Nathan feel like a king surveying his empire. Today, they felt like the walls of a beautifully decorated coffin. It was 9 a.m. on a Thursday, less than 48 hours after the divorce papers had been signed in the sterile conference room of Montgomery and Pierce. Nathan was nursing a black coffee and a throbbing headache. He had spent the last 2 nights at the Ritz-Carlton, waiting for Victoria Wentworth to return his calls. She hadn't. The heavy oak door to his office burst open without a knock. Gregory, company's chief financial officer, a man who usually moved with the slow, calculated grace of a career accountant, practically sprinted into the room. His face was the color of old parchment. Gregory, what the hell? Nathan snapped, spilling a drop of coffee onto his pristine white cuff. I told my assistant to hold all interruptions. I'm waiting for a call from the Wentworths regarding the bridge loan. Gregory slammed a thick, red-tabbed folder onto Nathan's desk. There isn't going to be a bridge loan, Nathan. And unless you have $42 million hiding in your couch cushions, there isn't going to be a Gallagher Freight by the end of the month. Nathan froze, his annoyance instantly evaporating into a cold, prickling dread. What are you talking about? Vanguard Credit gave us a 90-day leniency period on the debt covenants. We have time to finalize the Wentworth merger. Vanguard revoked the leniency, Gregory said, his voice trembling as he pointed a shaking finger at the top document. Yesterday afternoon, less than an hour after your divorce was finalized, they filed an acceleration notice. Every single cent of our corporate debt is now due in 14 days. They cited a breach of the liquidity thresholds from our last quarterly audit by Deloitte. They can't do that, Nathan shouted, standing up so fast his leather chair crashed into the credenza behind him. That's unprecedented. We've been a client of Vanguard for 5 years. Who authorized this? It gets worse, Gregory continued, ignoring Nathan's outburst. Our primary shipping hubs in Detroit and Indianapolis, the ones we lease, the holding company that owns those properties, just sold them. The new landlord is a commercial real estate conglomerate. They invoked a change of ownership clause and are tripling our rent, effective immediately. We can't afford to park our own trucks, Nathan. Nathan's chest tightened. He felt like all the oxygen had been vacuumed from the room. Who bought the properties? Some shell corporation, Gregory said, frantically wiping sweat from his forehead. But I traced the registered agent. It points back to Aegis Global Holdings, the same parent megacorporation that owns Vanguard Credit. Someone at the very top of the food chain is systematically dismantling us. Nathan scrambled for his phone. His fingers were numb as he dialed Victoria Wentworth's private number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Finally, a voice answered, but it wasn't the soft, encouraging tone of his supposed savior. Nathan, the gruff, aristocratic voice of Richard Wentworth, Victoria's father, boomed through the receiver. Richard, Nathan breathed, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. I was hoping to speak with Victoria. We need to expedite the capital injection. We've hit a slight snag with our creditors. There is no capital injection, Nathan. And there will be no merger, Richard said, his tone as cold and hard as a Chicago winter. What? Richard, you promised. Victoria and I. Victoria is on a flight to London, Richard interrupted smoothly. Let me be perfectly clear, Nathan. Yesterday evening, I received a phone call from the senior partners at Blackstone, followed by an even more terrifying call from the private equity division of Aegis Global. They informed me that if Wentworth Industries injects a single dollar into Gallagher Freight, they will pull their institutional backing from our entire European expansion. Nathan's stomach plummeted. Aegis? Why would Aegis care about a regional logistics merger? I don't know who you angered, son, Richard said quietly, a hint of genuine pity creeping into his voice. But you didn't just step on a snake. You walked into the viper's nest. Aegis Global doesn't just want your company to fail. They want it erased. Consider this my final communication with you. Do not call my daughter again. The line went dead. Nathan stared at the phone in his hand. The room was spinning. He sank back into his chair, the weight of a 70-year-old family legacy crushing down on his shoulders. Before he could process the sheer magnitude of the catastrophe, the office door swung open again. His mother, Brianna, and his sister, Violet, strolled in. They looked like they had just stepped off the cover of a high society magazine, carrying designer shopping bags from the boutiques on Oak Street. Nathan, darling, Brianna chirped, completely oblivious to the suffocating tension in the room. We just picked up the most stunning dresses for the Commerce and Innovation Gala next week. Have you spoken to Victoria? I assume she'll be your +1 now that we've finally taken out the trash. Violet dropped her bags on the leather sofa, sighing dramatically. Thank God you didn't give Audrey a dime more than 50,000. I swear, the way she looked at us in that law office, she actually thought she was better than us. Delusional. Nathan slowly looked up at his mother and sister, the women who had constantly whispered in his ear, who had convinced him that his loving, supportive wife was an anchor dragging him down. He had destroyed marriage to appease their vanity and his own ego, chasing a lifeline that had just vanished into thin air. Get out, Nathan whispered, his voice hoarse. Brianna blinked, her perfectly painted lips parting in confusion. Excuse me? I said. Get out, Nathan roared, slamming his fists onto the desk so hard the coffee cup shattered, sending dark liquid splattering across the Deloitte audit reports. There is no Victoria. There is no merger. We are $42 million in debt. The loans are due in 2 weeks, and our rent just tripled. Gallagher Freight is dead, Mother. Brianna staggered back, her face turning ashen. No, that's impossible. You have the Wentworths. The Wentworths just cut all ties with us because whoever owns Aegis Global Holdings threatened to destroy them if they helped us, Nathan yelled, his chest heaving, tears of sheer panic stinging his eyes. We are bankrupt. We are going to lose the house, the cars, everything. Violet stared at him in wide-eyed horror, her designer shopping bags suddenly looking like ridiculous, irrelevant props. But we're the Gallaghers, she stammered weakly. Not anymore, Gregory said quietly, from the corner of the room, gathering his files. I'll be resigning effective immediately, Nathan. Good luck. As the CFO walked out, leaving the Gallagher family alone in the ruins of their empire, Nathan buried his face in his hands. He thought of Audrey. He thought of the serene, quiet way she had told him to keep the $50,000. Put it toward your debt with Vanguard Credit, she had said. A chilling, terrifying thought began to form in the back of Nathan's mind, but he forcefully pushed it down. It was impossible. Audrey was just a freelance consultant. She was just a quiet girl from the suburbs, wasn't she? The Field Museum of Natural History had been transformed into a glittering cathedral of capitalism for the annual Chicago Commerce and Innovation Gala. Underneath the towering, skeletal remains of a titanosaur, the city's most powerful elite gathered to drink champagne, forge alliances, and quietly destroy their rivals. Nathan, Brianna, and Violet stood near the back of the massive Stanley Field Hall, desperately trying to blend in. They had paid $5,000, a ticket money they absolutely did not have, put on a credit card that was dangerously close to its limit. This gala was Nathan's last desperate play. He needed to find a venture capitalist or a rogue hedge fund manager willing to offer a predatory bailout. Brianna was nursing a flute of champagne, her smile tight and brittle as she scanned the room. "Stand up straight, Nathan," she hissed under her breath. "You look like a beaten dog. The sharks can smell blood. You need to look like you're turning investors away, not begging for scraps. It's hard to look triumphant when we're 2 weeks away from foreclosure, Mother," Nathan muttered, tugging at the collar of his tuxedo. He felt sick. Every time he made eye contact with a former business associate, they quickly turned away. Word had already spread through the financial district. Gallagher Freight was radioactive. "Look," Violet whispered, pointing a discreet finger toward the grand marble staircase. "It's Victoria." Nathan followed her gaze. Victoria Wentworth was standing near the VIP velvet ropes, looking radiant in a silver gown. She was laughing with a group of investment bankers. Nathan took a step forward, a pathetic spark of hope igniting in his chest. Maybe if he could just talk to her face to face, away from her father. But as he moved, Victoria made eye contact with him. Her smile vanished instantly. She turned her back to him, physically shielding herself with the bankers, making it entirely clear that he was dead to her. Nathan stopped in his tracks, a wave of profound humiliation washing over him. Suddenly, a murmur rippled through the massive hall. The low hum of networking and jazz music tapered off, replaced by a collective, breathless whisper. Heads turned toward the main entrance. "What's going on?" Brianna asked, going up on her tiptoes. "I overheard the mayor's chief of staff," a nearby tech entrepreneur, whispered excitedly to his companion. "The CEO of Aegis Global Holdings just arrived. She never makes public appearances. They say she's looking for a new flagship headquarters in the city." Nathan's blood ran cold. Aegis Global, the invisible leviathan that was currently suffocating his family to death. If he could just get 2 minutes with this CEO, if he could just explain that Gallagher Freight was a legacy institution, that they just needed restructuring. A phalanx of private security, in sharp dark suits, moved into the hall, gently but firmly, parting the sea of billionaires and politicians. Behind them walked Andrew Pendleton, the feared British attorney, known to command boardrooms with a single glance. And then, stepping into the warm glow of the chandeliers, came the CEO. Nathan stopped breathing. She was wearing a custom, structural emerald green gown that caught the light like liquid glass. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, cascaded in sleek, polished waves over her shoulders. Around her neck rested a string of flawless, unheated Burmese rubies that likely cost more than Nathan's entire company. She moved with a terrifying, absolute confidence, the kind of gravity that only belongs to someone who commands billions of dollars and thousands of lives. It was Audrey. "What?" Violet choked out, her champagne glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the marble floor. What is she doing here?" Brianna's face contorted in a mix of rage and absolute bewilderment. How did she get past security? Did she use that $50,000 to rent a dress and crash the gala? The absolute nerve. She's probably trying to find a rich man to leech off of. Nathan couldn't speak. His brain short-circuited. He watched in paralyzed horror as the mayor of Chicago practically tripped over himself to greet her, shaking her hand with eager reverence. He watched as Richard Wentworth, the man who had coldly told Nathan to never call his daughter again, approached Audrey with his head slightly bowed in profound respect. "I'm going to put a stop to this," Brianna hissed, her aristocratic pride blinding her to the blatantly obvious reality unfolding in front of her. "She is humiliating us by being here. People know she's your ex-wife, Nathan. It looks pathetic." Before Nathan could grab her arm, Brianna and Violet were marching across the ballroom floor, weaving through the elite crowd directly toward the VIP section, where Audrey was holding court. Nathan, propelled by sheer, morbid panic, stumbled after them. "Audrey, Brianna's shrill voice cut through the sophisticated murmur of the crowd. Audrey, who had been quietly conversing with a senior partner from Goldman Sachs, paused. She turned slowly. Her expression was perfectly serene, completely devoid of the meekness Brianna was so used to seeing. Andrew Pendleton immediately stepped forward, placing a hand inside his suit jacket, signaling the security detail. "Please step back from Miss Miller," Andrew commanded, his voice slicing through the air like a razor. "Oh, please, tell your rented bodyguards to relax," Brianna scoffed, stopping a few feet away. She looked Audrey up and down with sneering disdain. "What is this, Audrey? A Cinderella complex? You took Nathan's money and bought yourself a ticket to play pretend with the adults? You don't belong here." The silence that fell over their immediate circle was absolute. The Goldman Sachs partner stared at Brianna as if she had just lost her mind. Richard Wentworth took a wide step back, distancing himself from the Gallaghers as if they were carrying a plague. Audrey didn't flinch. She took a slow sip of her sparkling water. "Hello, Brianna. Violet, Nathan." Nathan arrived, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at Andrew Pendleton, then at the security, and finally at Audrey. The rubies around her neck caught the light. "Audrey," Nathan whispered, his voice trembling. "What is going on?" Before Audrey could answer, William, a heavy-set managing director at Chase Bank, stepped up, oblivious to the family drama. "Miss Miller, brilliant move on the Gallagher freight acquisition, by the way. Letting Vanguard squeeze the debt covenants was masterful. Are you going to liquidate their assets or absorb the fleet?" Brianna froze. Her jaw actually dropped. What did he just say? Audrey handed her water glass to an aide. She looked at the three Gallaghers, her gaze as cold and deep as the Mariana Trench. "To answer your question, William," Audrey said, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet space, never breaking eye contact with Nathan. "We are liquidating." The management of Gallagher Freight proved to be deeply incompetent, overly reliant on outdated nepotism, and entirely lacking in basic survival instincts. Violet let out a strangled gasp. Brianna looked like she was about to faint, her eyes darting frantically between Audrey and the terrifyingly silent crowd of billionaires watching them. "You," Nathan choked out, the reality finally crashing down on him with the force of a falling building. "You are Aegis Global. You own Vanguard Credit. I am the founder and sole shareholder of Aegis Global Holdings. Yes," Audrey said calmly. "My net worth, as of this morning's market open, is roughly $3.4 billion. Brianna let out a high-pitched, hysterical noise. "No, no, you were a freelancer. You worked on a laptop in the kitchen. I built tech infrastructure software in my 20s and leveraged the capital into private equity." "Brianna," Audrey said, her tone devoid of any malice, which somehow made it worse. It was the tone of a titan stepping on an ant. "I liked working in the kitchen. It had good natural light." "You lied to me," Nathan shouted, his fear suddenly morphing into a desperate, grasping rage. "For 3 years, you lied to me. We were married." "I never lied," Audrey corrected smoothly. "I simply allowed you to believe what made you comfortable. You needed to feel superior, Nathan. You and your family needed me to be small so you could feel big. I was willing to play that role because I loved you. I was willing to fund your lifestyle, silently manage your missteps, and let you be the king of your little castle." She took a step closer to him. Nathan instinctively shrank back. "But you couldn't just be happy, could you?" Audrey continued, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "You had to humiliate me. You had to discard me the moment you thought a better, richer option came along. You divorced me for $50,000, Nathan." "Audrey, please," Nathan begged, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. He reached out a hand, but Andrew Pendleton swiftly blocked him. "Please, it was a mistake. My mother pushed me." "Do not blame your mother for your own weakness," Audrey cut him off sharply. "You made your choice. You wanted a partner who operated at the highest levels of the corporate world. You wanted someone who understood leverage, capital, and true pressure. Well, Nathan, you found her, and then you divorced her." Audrey turned away from him, the emerald silk of her dress sweeping gracefully across the marble floor. "Andrew," she said over her shoulder. "Yes, Miss Miller, ensure the eviction notices for the Gallagher warehouses are executed at 8 a.m. tomorrow," Audrey instructed, "and freeze all negotiations regarding their debt restructuring. I want the company dismantled and sold for scrap by Friday." "Understood," Andrew smiled. As Audrey walked away, swallowed back into the sea of Chicago's elite, who eagerly parted to make way for her, Nathan collapsed to his knees, right there on the gala floor. Brianna sobbed openly, her hands covering her face, while Violet stared blankly at the shattered glass of her champagne flute. They had wanted to take out the trash. Instead, they had thrown away an empire, and in return, the empire had come back to crush them into dust. The dismantling of a 70-year-old legacy did not happen with a dramatic explosion. It happened with the irritating, repetitive sound of packing tape ripping off a dispenser. By 8 a.m. on Friday, exactly as Audrey had commanded, the Detroit and Indianapolis shipping hubs of Gallagher, freight, and logistics were swarmed by private security contractors and corporate auditors from Vanguard Credit. The trucks were grounded, the loading bays were locked. Employees were handed severance packages generously funded entirely by Aegis Global, completely bypassing the bankrupt Gallagher accounts and told to go home. In Chicago, Nathan sat in his darkened office, listening to the muffled sounds of his remaining administrative staff packing up their desks. The power to the executive suite had been cut an hour ago. He stared blankly at the $50,000 cashier's check sitting on his desk. It was the settlement money he had so arrogantly forced upon Audrey. The cruelest joke of all was that when he had desperately tried to deposit it back into the company's operating account to make payroll, the bank informed him that Vanguard Credit had already frozen all Gallagher assets. The check was essentially a worthless piece of paper. The door opened, and Braden, a burly liquidator wearing a high-visibility vest, stepped in, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Gallagher, we're going to need you to vacate the premises. The building's lease has been transferred to the receivership." Nathan didn't argue. He didn't have the energy. He picked up his leather briefcase, walked out of the glass doors, and took the elevator down to the lobby for the last time. When he arrived at the penthouse in Lincoln Park, the situation was infinitely worse. The heavy mahogany doors of the apartment were propped open. Brianna was shrieking in the foyer, clutching a hideous, antique Ming vase to her chest, as two men in tailored suits calmly inventoried the artwork on the walls. Violet was sitting on the floor, weeping into her hands, her phone buzzing endlessly with notifications from her former high society friends who had already heard the news and were eagerly texting their condolences mixed with toxic gossip. "You can't do this!" Brianna screamed at the men. "This is a private residence. This has nothing to do with the corporate debt." "Actually, ma'am, it does," one of the men said politely, handing her a legal document. "Mr. Gallagher used this property as collateral to secure a secondary line of credit 3 months ago. The debt has been accelerated. The property is now in foreclosure." Nathan stood in the doorway, paralyzed. He had done that. He had taken out the loan behind his mother's back, assuming the Wentworth merger would cover it. Brianna whipped her head around and saw Nathan. Her eyes, usually so calculated and poised, were wild with aristocratic panic. "Nathan, tell them," she shrieked. "Tell them they cannot take my home." "It's gone, Mother," Nathan said, his voice hollow. "Everything is gone. Audrey took it all." "Then go fix it." Brianna marched up to him, her face flushed red, and slapped him hard across the cheek. The sharp crack echoed in the cavernous penthouse, silencing even the liquidators for a brief second. "You are a man. Go to that woman and demand our assets back. Threaten to sue her for fraud. She hid billions of dollars from us during a divorce proceeding." Nathan touched his stinging cheek. He looked at his mother, finally seeing the ugly, grasping reality beneath her designer clothes and country club manners. "We signed a post-nuptial waiver of all financial discovery to speed up the divorce so I could marry Victoria," he whispered. "Our own lawyer insisted on it. We literally signed away the right to ever claim her assets. We dug our own grave. I don't care, Brianna screeched, losing all pretense of sanity. Go down to her office and fix this, Nathan, or don't ever come back. 2 hours later, Nathan found himself standing on the pavement in front of the Aegis Global Holdings Tower in the heart of the financial district. It was a staggering monument of glass and black steel that pierced the Chicago skyline. For years, Nathan had driven past this building, looking up at it with a mix of envy and awe, wondering what kind of titans operated inside. He walked through the revolving doors into a lobby that looked like a modern art museum. He approached the pristine, white marble reception desk. I need to see Audrey Miller, Nathan said to the imposing security director, standing behind the desk. I'm her husband. Ex-husband. The security director didn't even blink. Miss Miller does not take unappointed visitors. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I am not leaving until I speak to her. Nathan raised his voice, the desperation clawing at his throat. Several executives walking through the lobby stopped to stare at the disheveled man in the wrinkled suit. Mr. Gallagher, the crisp, sharp British accent cut through the murmurs of the lobby. Nathan turned to see Andrew Pendleton stepping out of a private elevator. The attorney was flanked by two massive security guards. Andrew, Nathan gasped, taking a step forward before the guards smoothly blocked his path. Andrew, please. I need 5 minutes with Audrey. My mother is being thrown out onto the street. We have nothing. Andrew adjusted his cuffs, his expression entirely devoid of pity. Miss Miller is currently on a conference call with the Prime Minister of Luxembourg regarding a sovereign wealth fund. She is entirely too busy to entertain a man who couldn't even manage a fleet of 50 delivery trucks. She destroyed me, Nathan yelled, his face turning red. She maliciously orchestrated the ruin of my family out of spite. Andrew let out a soft, genuinely amused chuckle. Oh, Mr. Gallagher, your arrogance is truly a medical marvel. Miss Miller didn't destroy you. She simply stopped saving you. Nathan froze. What? Andrew stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, lethal register so only Nathan could hear. Do you honestly believe you were a successful vice president, Nathan? Do you think Gallagher Freight was actually profitable over the last 3 years? I kept us afloat. I managed the logistics. You managed nothing, Andrew interrupted coldly. 3 years ago, right after you married Audrey, your father's company was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. You had over-leveraged the fleet, and your regional managers were embezzling funds. You were 90 days away from total liquidation. Nathan stared at him, his mouth opening and closing silently. Audrey loved you, Andrew continued, a hint of disgust in his tone. She didn't want to see you fail, so she quietly directed Vanguard Credit to purchase your debt from the regional banks. For 3 years, she artificially subsidized your fuel costs through her offshore holding companies. She anonymously paid your union dues when you mismanaged the payroll. She quite literally funded the illusion of your success so that your fragile male ego wouldn't shatter. The floor beneath Nathan's feet felt like it was turning to liquid. Every win, every quarter he thought he had successfully navigated, every time he had bragged at a dinner party, while Audrey sat quietly beside him, it was all a lie. She was the architect of his survival, and he had treated her like an embarrassing burden. We never pursued the debt covenants because she forbade it, Andrew said. She allowed your mother to insult her. She allowed your sister to mock her. She absorbed all of your family's toxic, pathetic behavior because she believed that underneath it all, you were a good man who just needed time to find his footing. Andrew stepped back, his eyes utterly cold. Then, you divorced her for $50,000 to chase a woman whose family net worth wouldn't even cover Aegis Global's annual tax bill, Andrew said, shaking his head. Miss Miller didn't ruin you, Nathan. She merely removed her protective hand and let the free market do what it should have done 3 years ago. You destroyed yourself. Andrew turned on his heel. Escort Mr. Gallagher out. If he returns, have him arrested for trespassing. Nathan didn't fight back, as the security guards took him by the arms and guided him out the revolving doors, tossing him out onto the cold Chicago pavement. He stood there, looking up at the towering black monolith of Aegis Global, realizing with absolute, soul-crushing certainty that he had held the world in his hands and he had thrown it away. 6 months later, the Mediterranean sun sparkled off the azure waters of Monaco's Port Hercules. Aboard a 300-foot superyacht named the Quiet Asset, Audrey Miller reviewed the final restructuring reports for Vanguard Credit on her tablet. Across the table, Olivia, her chief operations officer, sipped an espresso. The integration of the Midwest logistics routes is complete, Olivia reported. By absorbing Gallagher Freight and implementing our AI routing, overhead is down 40%. The division is highly profitable. Excellent, Audrey murmured, not looking up. And the physical assets? The Lincoln Park penthouse was auctioned to a tech billionaire. The Gallagher family's personal items were liquidated to cover unsecured debts. I do have an update on them, if you're curious. Audrey paused. The sting of Nathan's betrayal had long faded into the peaceful satisfaction of her drama-free life, but a sliver of curiosity remained. Go ahead. Brianna is renting a rundown apartment in Peoria, blacklisted from Chicago society, and spending her days posting corporate conspiracy theories online. Violet dropped out of her design academy to work retail. Audrey shook her head slowly. And Nathan? With his reputation toxic in the executive sector, he needed immediate work to avoid personal bankruptcy. He's a nighttime shipping dispatcher. Olivia smiled grimly. For us, he clocks in at 11 p.m. at an Aegis logistics hub in Gary, Indiana. Audrey looked out at the glittering ocean, struck by the universe's sheer poetry. The man who demanded a high-powered corporate wife was now a tiny, insignificant cog in the empire his wife had built in her kitchen. Leave him be, Audrey said softly. He's earning an honest living for the first time. Let him work. Back in Gary, Indiana, freezing rain lashed against the windows. Nathan sat in a cramped, fluorescent-lit dispatch booth, wearing a cheap polyester shirt embroidered with the Aegis Global logo. The arrogant spark in his eyes was completely extinguished, replaced by heavy, dark bags of exhaustion. His phone buzzed on the scarred metal desk. Brianna. He ignored it, unable to stomach another bitter lecture about how he had ruined their lives. He keyed his radio. Unit 42, cleared for departure from Bay 6. Drive safe. Copy that, dispatch, the radio crackled. Nathan leaned back, rubbing his exhausted face. On a fuzzy television mounted in the corner, a financial news network played on mute. A chyron flashed across the bottom. AEG's global CEO announces $10 billion initiative at Davos. Nathan stood up and pressed his hand against the cold glass of his booth. There was Audrey. She stood on a brightly lit stage, flanked by world leaders. Wearing an impeccably tailored black suit, she exuded absolute power, grace, and unbreakable confidence. A suffocating knot of grief and profound loss swelled in his throat. He remembered her, sitting on the floor of their old apartment, laughing over takeout. He remembered the quiet, steady love she had offered, love he had been too weak, too blind, and too arrogant to appreciate. He realized the billions were the least of what he had lost. He had thrown away the only person who ever truly believed in him when he was nothing. Hey, Gallagher, his shift supervisor barked, banging a fist on the door. Stop daydreaming. Print those loading manifests, now. Right away, Nathan muttered, his voice cracking. He turned away from the screen, sat back down at his worn-out desk, and went back to work for his ex-wife. In the end, the spectacular downfall of the Gallagher family wasn't brought about by a hostile corporate raider or a malicious enemy, but by their own blinding arrogance. Nathan Gallagher had spent his entire life demanding the world conform to his fragile ego, utterly failing to realize that his silent, unassuming wife was the only thing holding his fragile universe together. By choosing the shallow allure of high society over genuine loyalty, he traded an empire for $50,000 and a lifetime of regret. Audrey Miller didn't need to exact a cruel revenge. She merely removed the shield she had spent years holding over him, allowing his own incompetence to deliver the final blow. Today, Audrey continues to shape global markets from the summit of her private equity empire, while Nathan sits in the shadows, quietly routing the very trucks that serve as a daily reminder of the queen he threw away.